I'm delighted to welcome on stage Geeta Jain, CEO, Carlson Wagonlit Travel, Alex Kaluzny, Chief Technology Officer for atEgencia, Albert Pozo, President of Amadeus Asia Pacific. So, thank you very much for joining. I'll just start with a few introductory comments. As per the latest GBTA BTI Outlook report, Asia Pacific today contributes almost 40% of global business travel spend. Asia houses 4 of the top 10 business travel markets globally, with China leading the way with $291 billion as the first and the largest business travel market, followed by, and then of course, Japan, South Korea, and India. For 2017, India is the fastest growing business travel market worldwide. Given this background, today's executive roundtable is especially apt. Our panelists represent a diverse array of industry partners who are driving technology and automation in business travel in Asia Pacific and across the world. So with this, I'd move to the panel. We're going to start with Albert and then move across this way, so follow a sequence. Yep. So first question really for the panel is, how do you compare and contrast the top 4 markets in Asia Pacific from a technology adoption standpoint? What are the key differences or things?
Well, I think there is really a lot of differences. I think we often put Asia Pacific as if it was like a homogeneous region, and I think it's full of heterogeneous conditions in many, many aspects. I think that maybe the one thing in common, let me just say, first of all, is that what we have in Asia in business travel, the business travelers in Asia, according to some of the studies we've done with McKinsey and Singapore Tourist Office, we see that the majority of them, 85%, want to work with digital processes when it comes to managed travel, and particularly in the context of air. It goes down to around 70 in the context of hotel bookings. So I think there is across the region, and maybe because of many things that have been mentioned throughout this morning, this mobile-first attitude, this innovation, this innovative mind, I think we see a great propensity into digital processes for business travel. Managed business travel, I'm talking here. And with that said, I think there are a couple of differences in 2 groups of countries I would define. On the one hand, we have, I would call mature markets like Japan, Korea, Australia, where they're focusing most of their travel management focus on technology is about creating efficiencies and managing compliance of travel policies and managing the integration of the travel policy with the expense and the rest end to end. Whereas I would say that India and China, they're more focused on the mobile aspects of travel and the providing solutions through mobile that enable self-booking services to the travelers. And they are still very much focusing or building on the already existing trends on mobile to manage the adoption of the travel programs through mobile technologies. I think these would be 2 camps, I mean, as a generic statements.
Alex?
Yeah, you definitely see a very large mobile adoption across the markets, so that's a very consistent trend. And what you've seen kind of in a lot of these markets is they didn't go the traditional route where it first would go into desktop, everybody adopts desktop, and then you move into mobile. You see kind of this hunger for the latest and greatest technology jumping directly into the mobile space. As far as the compliance space, I think there's also kind of some differences. India is kind of very big in compliance, and you see that kind of with a lot of the requests, kind of what the companies are asking for, versus kind of in some of the other countries, it is more about kind of the user experience, how easy it is to book the trip. But you do also see quite a lot of emphasis being placed on how easy are the tools to work with, how well can I go anytime, anywhere, can I make my trip, and it really becomes a bigger and bigger factor in people's decision-making process.
Got it. Geeta?
Just in addition, I think all 4 markets have a lot of commonalities from a retail standpoint, but within the business travel space, I see that the different drivers that are either enabling or not enabling the growth of technology adoption. So take China as an example. It's the market leader at the moment in terms of online and mobile adoption for business travel. Within the CWT world, over 70% of our transactions go through seamlessly through an online and mobile platform. Followed closely by Australia, which is over 65%, but that's driven more culturally, where it's a self-serving mature market. Now, Singapore is another self-serving mature market, however, the adoption is only as low as 30%. And the reason for that is everything out of Singapore is an international booking. So we're not quite there from a business travel standpoint to enable and allow international bookings yet. Of course, we're making some steady progress. India is definitely trailing behind so far. Thus far, we are only catching up close to 20 to 23% on OBT adoption, almost getting ready for the mobile deployment. But I think the challenges we faced in India have been somewhat unique from a content standpoint as well, not just the market readiness. And now that the content issue has finally been sorted out over the last 2 to 3 years on the non-GDS LCC content, I see that the market is at an inflection point where there's a rapid adoption across.
Could be rapid adoption.
Absolutely.
So that brings me to my next question, really, in terms of, when we talk about markets like India and maybe even Singapore, as you mentioned, you found that adoption rates were lower. Is there really something that the customer is not understanding about the value of technology, or is it more a cultural thing? Maybe Geeta, you can start and we'll go back to Albert.
Sure. I think multiple factors around that. We all recognize India to be a very high-touch servicing environment, and self-servicing in a business travel environment has not picked up. One part of it has been because you always have assistants and admins and bookers who will make arrangements for you through an offline agent somewhere. So culturally, it's been a bit of a roadblock. That said, I would say we are dealing with the same demographic when it comes to retail usage, and the same set of people are very good at using e-commerce. So a large part of that had to do with the fact that the business travel framework has not necessarily focused on enabling user-friendly processes. Approval, as an example, is still a big roadblock. In business travel, practically every other transaction needs an approval prior to ticketing. Now, online technologies are not quite, they defeat the purpose. If you want to go to and fro to make a booking, then you're defeating the purpose of having a seamless experience. So there are cultural elements, form of payment another being a big one, credit card penetration being low. But as I said, I think now we're at an inflection point in the last 12 months. We've seen a huge shift where the corporates do recognize that they're leaving money on the table by not adopting this technology, and therefore I see that coming up rather quickly now.
Yeah, for us, to be honest, we haven't really seen kind of the APAC countries lag in online adoption. We take a global approach where we have a global platform where customers are able to use the same technology across the world. So it's proven technology in other parts of the world, and what we get over 90% global adoption, and we're seeing very similar global adoption rates in APAC as well. We have cases where we've had customers who've come over to us who had completely offline bookings, no online adoption. In their first few months, get to 80–90% adoption really quickly, and I think a lot of it is people are looking for that ease of use, consumer type experience. We talk about it. We want to be able to provide travel services for what we call the Expedia generation. People who, for their personal travel, they will go out, they will book on sites like Expedia, and they expect the same exact experience when they're booking their trip for work. So if we're able to provide that to them, we see very similar types of online adoption rates as in other parts of the world.
Okay, so quite differing in your perspectives. Albert, do you have a point of commonality there?
Well, I would say, let me try to see if I can concur with both. No, actually, I think there's definitely an aspect of content fragmentation that not only in India, but across the world, wherever you have fragmented content and you don't have tools who are really efficient aggregating that content, then of course the tools are not being adopted. Now, I think technology today permits to aggregate that content more and more, even in a market like India, where you have, in domestic, you have 2/3 of the air content is with 5 LCCs. You still have good solutions to be able really to manage that from a technology perspective, and we do so. Now, I would say the main beyond this content fragmentation, I would say, challenge, the main challenge that I see in a number of markets is about simplifying the travel programs. And to your point about travel approval, travel approval should only be necessary when you are not in policy, not when you are in policy. And a number of recommendations about looking into the travel programs to make sure that they are living up to really the behaviors that most of the travelers have as consumers. So they want to self-service, they want to have easy access to some of the options, they want to give their feedback. And I think the more that travel programs addresses the travelers' needs and expectations and bringing the travelers also, even in corporate travel management, at the center of the travel programs, enables those travel policies to be adopted with the right technology, of course.
Got it. So we were talking about India, and I think one of the unique characteristics of a market like India, though it's growing very fast, is most SPT adoptions, if you look across the market, seem to focus on the domestic air side. They tend to hold back on international SPT implementations for whatever reasons. Is that a situation which you think, maybe starting with Geeta, will ever go away? And is there a way for us to automate the entire life cycle of business travel and expense?
I think intuitively speaking, domestic transactions lend themselves to online adoption simply because they're straightforward. There isn't a huge amount of knowledge transfer required. The stakes are rather low, so the corporates are comfortable. And they anyway generate, 80% of the transactions on business travel are domestic, so you capture a good majority of the bulk of volumes there. There's also the element of where do you get the maximum benefit by using online booking tools. In the context of India, we know that all the domestic tickets are instant purchases. So when we actually go out and through an offline mode and see quotations, get approvals, etc., by the time you've lost the fare, you leave a lot of money on the table. So the corporates recognize that. The same is not necessarily true on the international side, right? Because the fares are not quite as dynamic. So there is an ease and convenience element, but the savings are not quite the same. The other thing, of course, and I feel that domestic is the first step towards it. International point-to-point is the next step which corporates are taking. Hotels, for sure, there's a huge uptake already and the trend is very positive. I would still caution against the international complex itineraries simply because, one, there is a level of expertise required. There is an angle of compliance in terms of how you route yourself. There are things like, minimum connecting time, etc. And for Indian passport holders, the biggest concern around making sure you have the right visas, and not just to the destination, but even through transit visas. So I would keep that away till we have smarter technology to address some of these requirements, but that's a very small percentage of the overall transactions. So if I add up the balance, we should still be able to drive about 80 to 85% transactions through such technology.
Alex, have you got the magic wand to answer a problem?
Yeah, well, we do see a difference, and there's definitely more complexity that comes with the international travel, and the people need to be able to trust more that they're able to find the right itinerary, the right trip for them. I was looking at some of the numbers for some of the clients that we thought would be representative of the different behavior in India, and one large client, for instance, that we have, they were doing 80% online adoption for domestic, but only 60% doing for international. So you do see a gap in that, but I think it's still very much possible, even for international, to be able to have very high online adoption. And we're constantly with the technology improving, being able to cut through that complexity and start offering the ease of having the customer themselves select rather than have an agent select a possible itinerary for them. I think that's a big part of it. You also mentioned expense and being able to take it all the way from travel to expense. It's been something that in India, but also around the world, we've been hearing our customers talk about. We've actually very recently, a few weeks ago, made an announcement about the integrations that we're doing on the expense side. So we have a suite of products that allows companies to be able to have the data flow through from the atEgencia system into whether it's expense or duty of care systems or ERP providers. But also we're releasing a few other products to be able to quickly pull in all your trip information, including receipts from your trip and send it to an expense provider, and doing full integration kind of where the goal is to be able to have a completely seamless experience with pretty much any expense provider that would like to be able to work with us, starting kind of with TravelDo, which is a provider in Europe, but it's something that we're definitely also kind of getting a lot from our customers. And kind of when we made the announcement, we've had a lot of interest, a lot of people coming to us kind of very excited because they do see this something as like a seamless experience is a big need in the market.
Great. Albert, with your launch of Citric, I think you have a lot of insight to give as well.
Well, yes, I think I fully concur with the point about really the whole industry in travel management is going to an end-to-end technology that goes from travel, I would say, approval or travel request through approval to itinerary management and then expensing and so on. This is definitely where the industry is going. And yeah, with Citric and our investments as a technology company, we're trying to keep all of those pieces of technology under one single app, which is very important because we want that to be really an app that really sticks to the traveler and accompanies the traveler across the journey. I think to the question about will international adoption will happen, without a doubt, because multinational companies are the first ones who are really, really very keen to invest in implementing and enforcing the compliance. And it's not just about managing travel costs, which of course is a very important thing, but it is about also delivering to the duty of care that they have and having in travel management the technology that enables them to know where the travelers are at every moment whenever any disruption happens. And that is something as a topic that hits really the board of many companies. They really have to be diligent about managing their employees when they're out there. And I think that's something which has really increased its position in the agenda of many of those companies. So the compliance, this is an aspect, but many aspects of compliance become more and more important for global multinationals. And without a doubt, those multinationals operating in Asia or out of Asia will definitely move in this direction, as many other multinationals we've seen in North America have done, or in Europe have done already. So without a doubt, and I think with a strong push from duty of care.
Got it. So when we look at, again, the APAC market as a whole, what are some of the immediate opportunities for the corporate buyer community to implement? What are global best practices that they could implement tomorrow in their business and really see a clear ROI emerging, whether it's from a user interface standpoint and process efficiency standpoint or a cost? So maybe we could, again, start with you, Albert, and come back to Geeta.
Well, I think there are a couple of points, and in fact, I was referring to them. I think to have a travel program be sticky, I think you need to work on adoption, and for that, you need to capture the experiences of your travelers. So there's no reason why in business travel, traveler experience doesn't matter. And it's not opposed to having a strong policy. So I think this is one of the key learnings that we've seen. Companies who succeed in adopting, in making their employees adopt their technology and their policies and travel programs, they are those that actually put the travelers at the center of their programs. So that's something which is really very important for companies to build upon. And I think TMCs have a lot to do there, and I think there's a lot of opportunity because those experiences cross many of your desks or your services that you provide, and having the data that enables those policies to be complemented, those travel programs to be complemented with that feedback, and adopting the negotiations and adopting really the policies accordingly is something which adds a lot of value. The other thing I would say is really having technology that enables to be, that is sticky, like this end-to-end, one app. Having a Citric for us or some others in the market that enables the traveler to make the travel requests, already eventually, hopefully linking it to their calendars as meetings get confirmed, all the way through to booking and having an itinerary that moves where they can really do their online check-in for hotels or for at the airport, or being able really to have their expense captured on the go to minimize the work. But it's not just the work, it's to maximize also the quality of the data that flows. So I think that's the second key, I would say, for programs to be successful, that they have this holistic end-to-end strategy as part of the program.
So the first one was strategy to get the user experience as part of it, and then getting this one app kind of workflow going. Alex, your thoughts?
Yeah, To build on that a little bit, having policy is not the same thing as policing kind of everything, every single thing that your travelers do. So it's about making it easy for people to comply with policy. And as Geeta was mentioning, there are realizations now that if you put in a lot of approval processes, you may actually be losing the fare that is out there and available. So kind of moving on past that, I need to have this very tight control over what every single person is doing towards providing just more tools and more visibility and transparency, because rather than having to say, I need to approve everything before it happens, if you have the right level of transparency, if you have the right level of technology that make it very easy for both the traveler and then kind of later on kind of the travel manager to see whether or not people are doing the right thing and then incenting people to do the right thing, I think you'll see a lot more of that behavior happen, and people will just be happier stay compliant within the travel program, and it'll be easier for them to get their job done.
Yeah. I think the user experience is key to adoption and stickiness, but I must call out that the business travel ecosystem in India is wired quite differently than most other parts of the world. In most parts of the world, the employees are empowered to take travel decisions in terms of booking travel, and the corporate checks take place at the time of expense management, right? It's the other way around in India. All the controls are loaded up front and practically zero expense management. So for all of that to change, we need to have a paradigm shift in how we look at our employees in the workforce. Quite understandable with the kind of demographics we have and the attrition, etc. People are not comfortable to let go of the purse strings out right up front. But to enable that seamless end-to-end integration, I think the whole framework has to change, where you allow for a booking decision to happen, then you put in place processes that simplify the internal mechanisms. You have a credit card platform, which is missing, because expense management is not about just expensing out a charge. It's the individual accountability and ownership. And if you don't have an individual billing platform, truly expense management has little relevance to that extent. So the individual credit card programs in India are minuscule in nature at this point of time. So we need to increase that adoption. And at the back end, we also need technology that we can plug and play between travel solution and expense management solution. Today, there are limited options around that, and they may not always integrate with each other. So I think we need to solve for each piece, but we can actually solve for the entire integrated solution there.
So I'd like to take this back to Alex and then to Albert, because I saw some nods and some other things. So I'd like to get your views on what you felt on what Geeta said.
Yeah, I think having kind of that trust in the employee there, and again, kind of going back to kind of don't police, but provide them with policy is an absolute agreement. And a lot of it should be about putting kind of the traveler in charge and having it be kind of having business travel be more humane, because you're already asking people kind of to travel to be away from their family, away from their friends. You want to be able to give them the right tool and don't make them feel like they have to justify everything, or they have to make, or they're not a trusted individual. So I think being able to kind of have this be about the people themselves, and you're right, it's going to take some time for people to see this, and I think how it's going to get there is through seeing results. Companies are going to have to try this, and something that we talk a lot about is test and learn. Try this out. Give maybe a part of your company kind of the responsibility to book their own travel. See how that goes, and you should be able to compare whether or not you're seeing kind of any significant differences in this. And if you're seeing the results that you want, be bold and go ahead with it.
And I must give an example on this. It's a very recent study. Sorry, just cutting you short. One of our largest customers, we did the study for them, and every single transaction that went out for approval before it was ticketed, we found annually they lost about $250,000 by just seeking in the fare differences. And then there's only 0.7% of the travel requests that were ever rejected.
Right.
So that 0.7% might have been a risk of what, $15,000, $20,000, but you left $250,000 on the table as a result of it. So there is something to look at there to say, what is the cost of control? And we're not recommending zero control. We're saying they have to be placed elsewhere in the entire system.
I mean, a couple of comments. I mean, the lowest, option is not necessarily the most effective. I mean, we're in business travel, and I think time and convenience to be in the right place at the right time it matters. So that's why it's very difficult to regulate. And there's not better regulation than the self-regulation, I firmly believe. And you know, some companies work with these like light policy, but visual guilt, where basically they give the options, you know, and they request that their travelers sign off if they want to go for the more expensive option. So they don't really prohibit it, or they're not really policing them, but they are really just making sure that they make the conscious choice of the option that is more expensive, and they may have a very good reason for that.
Yeah.
But I think that those type of, I would say, approaches to policy management, like the self-regulation, you know, the visual guilt, or call it whatever, is something which is very much attached to the fact that you have professionals who actually travel. So you give them empowerment to a number of business decisions. Will you not give them certain level of empowerment for the business travel decisions? Correct. So I think that's really up for experimenting. It doesn't work in the same way in industries, geographies, but actually it's something that I think companies need to look at very, very closely.
Got it. Interesting. I can see the raise your hand thing going up on the screen. We're still waiting for the audience questions, so we'll keep plugging away. I wanted to ask you, what are in your estimation individually, what are the top 2 or 3 innovations that will drive the future of business travel in the APAC region? So starting with Albert, and we'll come back to Geeta.
Well, I mean, we could refer to, you know, I think a lot has been said about, you know, peer-to-peer economy and so on. I definitely believe this is important. It's going to be very significant. But if I would say something which has not been necessarily so much on the radar screen of the discussions, I would say smart airports. Smart airports.
Okay.
I think connected airport. Basically, the fact that you have the possibility to gather data at the airport around, you know, the situations in security of traffic, you know, the different, I would say, gates availability, connecting the data that really, you know, is available between suppliers and travelers, and making the airports be that place where data really talks to each other, which doesn't happen today, to be very honest, is one of the key challenges. If you look into the last, I would say, 40 years of this industry, many things have changed quite significantly in the overall travel process. But the airports have stayed to a large degree very much still really the break point, you know, where the traveler, in a way, it's in the most exposed situation. For many travelers, being at the airports or the situation of the airport is a stressful situation, is where disruptions happen, is where sometimes really, you know, you find yourself exposed as a traveler. And yet is the place where I think the least has been done to connect the data. So I think now with the Internet of Things, the fact that you can set up you know, beacons, you can really gather a lot more informations from the different parts of the ecosystem and really combine them to make the airport experience a much better one. I think that's the area where we are going to be seeing the greatest improvements. Let me just put the commercial. We're working very hard, actually, with our airport technology to do so, actually.
Gaurav, we have a question from the floor.
Okay, I can't see where it is.
Hi, Gaurav, way back here.
Okay, hi.
Okay. So my question is I'm Soumya and I represent an organization called Rangde. So my question is, having been in the HR space, I used to see a big struggle like Geeta mentioned about the approvals. But behind the scenes, there used to be a lot of struggle to interact with multiple vendors. Say, insurance, you have one vendor, Forex, somebody else, a matrix card, somebody else. So you have multiple people to interact with. Is there any thought in combining and getting all this on an online platform, which would make it more like add-on you know, stuff that's complementary?
What you're asking for is a completely integrated buying experience where you buy everything through the process and complete it, right?
Absolutely.
So Albert, I think you might be the best one to comment on, and then Alex.
Well, just very simply, I think, yes, your dreams can come true very soon because actually that platform exists. Amadeus has a platform with Citric where we combine the traditional GDS, which is pre-aggregated content, with also, it's an open platform that allows you really to connect different suppliers and be able really to have a joint single itinerary with all of the data, even though these individual apps that are connected into the platform have their own also sources, but we synchronize and mirror those. So yes, that's very important to have a complete picture of where the traveler is and all of the elements in the travel, in the travel program that have been booked, and also as a means to also aggregate the data to feed afterwards really the supplier teams that are negotiating the best deals. So technology is available today on the market that enables that type of aggregation. It is true that it is at early stages of being adopted, and I think we're going to see those adoptions happening over time.
Alex?
Yeah, when it comes to being able to book different parts of your trip, I would say that's already there, right? We're able to provide you with, air, hotel, car. You can book an Uber from the mobile app. You can, do a lot of things. But I think where you're going with your questions, what about other services like insurance, which is actually something that we're currently investigating. Being able to do visa services and other services. And we've talked about expense. This is now becoming something that is being much more integrated, is getting much more attention. So I think you're seeing that trend happen and develop as more and more it becomes not just a place to book airline and maybe hotel stays, but it's becoming more and more of a platform where it's different types of inventory, but also different types of services that you can get seamlessly by going to one place.
Geeta, any comments?
Yeah, I think the technology is there. It exists today and it's getting better in terms of integrating other components, non-air components. But I think it's also the readiness of the market to be able to integrate the content and make a live booking take place. So you might have a single window to be able to request for these services, but at the back end it might still be a manual process. Increasingly in the last 12 months or so, we find that the other players in the market, the car vendors, the insurance vendors, they are bringing up their APIs now that we can now plug into our technology so that you can do a real-time booking by yourself. So yes, we're there, almost there with most parts of your travel requirements.
So thank you for that question, because that brings me to my closing question. We're just at 3 minutes, so I think we have enough time for another question. That's what should be changing with buyers and with industry partners to really embrace the change that's coming. I guess we all need to make changes in the way we do it. You've already commented on it. So I'd like a perspective from each of you on what should buyers be changing in their approach to business travel, what should suppliers and intermediaries be changing, to get this, idea of an ideal experience into reality. So again, Albert, you on the spot.
To keep it simple, I would say keep the traveler at the center. As a supplier, you want to make sure that your services speak to the needs of that traveler, particularly in business travel. As a technology, it needs to be relevant, and it should not be very different from the technology that same traveler for business is using as a leisure, as a consumer. And definitely from the companies is taking the feedback of the traveler, because there's no better trusted partner than their own employees in making sure that the policies and programs really get evolved.
Being traveler focused for the company, absolutely the right thing to do. I think this is very often that people or buyers approach this from a purely procurement perspective, and they go down, and even when they evaluate different tools or different partners, they look at, okay, what's the checklist of features that you may offer, or what's the price that you're going to get me, and they don't think about very much what will it actually be like for the travelers to either use the technology or to travel on these suppliers, with these suppliers. I think for the partners, in a way, do the same. Put the traveler at the heart of the whole experience. One of the things, and this is also consistent with what should be one of the trends in business travel, should be personalization. With every single person who comes, for example, to our site, we know who they are. If they call the call center, whether it's us, whether it's CWT, the people are known and identified. We're looking to give them a much more customized experience. We know where you've been before. We should be able to easily allow you to search for those locations, and we do that already. We also can tell you if you're going to a certain destination, because we know what company you work for, where did the other people who went to this destination, where they stayed, right? So don't treat a customer like a blank page. Make sure that you also put them at the heart, at the center of the experience, and give them something that's personalized, give them something that's very relevant.
Got it. Geeta, closing comments.
Gaurav, I'm probably going to repeat what both Alex and Albert have said, but maybe a little differently. I think for the longest time, we've insulated the business travelers from what's happening in the retail world. That's a mistake we've made, but now at a time where we feel that there is a demand, whether it's a demographic change with millennials coming in, or just the fact that our consumption behavior has changed in every respect of our day-to-day lives, we need to take away that boundary and allow for the same experience on both the sides. And that allows for technology that takes away all the clunky processes we have internally, as also the personalization element that is coming and becoming relevant to us every single day. I mean, the most used phrase around that, the segment of one, that is important in the business travel world as it is on the retail side.
Great.
Gaurav, we have an audience question.
Okay.
Wait, right here.
We've got only 15 seconds, so we need you to be really short and crisp.
Yeah, I'll make it quick. My name is Sunny. I'm from American Express. My question is related to traveler productivity when he's on the move, and this is particularly in the context of India. First mile of the journey and last mile of the journey. What's your take on that? Before you board the flight and after your flight lands, significant amount of time goes into that. So have you heard corporate needs around improving some of the inefficiencies there related to traffic and other things?
Who's your question for? Anyone in particular?
So, maybe I can
Okay,
speak to a little
sure.
bit of it. One of the things that we also provide on our mobile app is integration to services like Uber or Citymapper, or being able to get directions, helping the customer out in that first mile or last mile that you mentioned, and even things like alerts, like when you land, being able to tell the customer, hey, your baggage is going to come out at this particular location. So I think all of this, while you may not, you have the conversations and you have people asking for it, but if you look at it from, again, a consumer point of view, what's happening in the consumer world, these are the types of things that are that are expected for people. And again, the same expectations are coming over to the business travel world.
One more audience question over here.
Yeah, that's our final one for the day. So,
Gaurav, right here.
Okay,
We're going to extend just a few minutes here.
This is Balaji from Instract. You mentioned about capturing passengers' retail experience and bringing it into business trips. What's the role of data in aligning and pegging this behavior with compliance? They don't go hand in hand sometimes.
So there are two sides to that. One is using data to be able to provide intimacy about the traveler, and Alex alluded to that. The amount of data that as TMCs and service providers will sit on, we should actually be able to enable you a one-click service where, because I know your preferences, I know your needs, I should be able to tell you, okay, if you're going to this destination, that's what you're looking for, just go ahead and do that. Now, does that conflict with the requirements of compliance? Probably not, because the framework of the corporate policy still remains the same. Within those variables and constraints, we're looking to make sure that the information that we're sitting on today, we're able to share and use that to your advantage. So I don't think it conflicts. Yes, there will be some conflict when we are trying to upsell and sell products which may or may not be in line with the corporate policy, which is where, again, the framework has to be defined very well. But I think most travel management companies understand the boundaries very well, and they would know exactly what is allowed within the policy.
Alex?
Yeah, and to add a little bit, as far as how data is being used on the policy side, it's right now policy is set up as a one-size-fits-all. No matter what you're doing, where you're going, there's no looking at data to see, should policy be flexible. And I think this is a big opportunity to apply some machine learning, artificial intelligence algorithms to be able to have policy that's flexible to the situation, and not just a one-size-fits-all, a collection of rules that you always apply no matter what.
Okay, so thank you very much to my panelists and to the audience for such an engaging discussion. Thank you, Geeta, Alex, and Albert. I think the key is really getting the traveler in the center of the program and building it around that. So